The night it all began was one of those quiet London evenings where the air felt thick and heavy, as though the world itself was holding its breath. It was August 31st, 1977, and Peggy Hodgson, a weary but loving single mother of 4, was just trying to end another long day at their small council house at 284 Green Street, Enfield. The children, Margaret, 13, Janet, 11, Johnny, 10, and Billy, 7, were tucked away upstairs, their laughter echoing faintly down the narrow hallway. The house was old but familiar. Every creak in the floorboards, every sigh of the pipes had its place in Peggy's mind, ordinary sounds of a home that had seen better years. Peggy sat in her worn armchair in the living room sipping her tea. The television flickered faintly with an evening broadcast, and outside, rain pattered softly against the window. She smiled to herself. Despite the constant struggle, bills piling up, raising 4 children alone, this was her world, her family, her peace. But peace has a way of ending without warning. Upstairs, Janet and Margaret were still whispering in their room. "Jan, move over, you're hogging the blanket," Margaret complained. "Shh," Janet giggled. "I heard something." "What now?" "Listen." Both fell silent. For a moment, there was only the soft tick of their bedside clock. Then, knock, knock, knock. It was faint, almost like someone tapping from inside the wall. Margaret frowned. "Janet, stop it." "It's not me," Janet whispered, eyes wide. Peggy, downstairs, heard it too. She looked up from her chair. "Girls?" she called. No answer. She sighed, putting down her mug. Probably them playing around again, she thought. But as she began up the stairs, the knocking grew louder, echoing through the narrow hallway, 3 sharp bangs that seemed to come from every direction at once. Peggy froze halfway up the stairs, her heart thudding. "Who's there?" she called into the darkness. No answer. Only the creak of the wooden steps beneath her feet. She reached the girls' room, pushed the door open, and saw her daughters huddled together on the bed, wide-eyed. "What's all this noise then?" Peggy asked, trying to sound calm. "Mom," Janet whispered, pointing toward the dresser. "It's moving." Peggy turned, and her blood ran cold. The tall wooden dresser against the far wall shuddered, then inched forward, scraping the floor with a low groan. "Don't be silly," Peggy said, though her voice trembled. She grabbed the dresser handles to push it back, but it pushed back. Hard. She stumbled backward, her eyes wide with disbelief. It wasn't her imagination. The dresser was sliding across the floor by itself, slow and deliberate, until it pressed firmly against the bedroom door, as if something invisible was trying to trap them inside. "Stop that!" Peggy shouted, yanking at it, but it wouldn't move. It felt as though another pair of unseen hands were holding it firmly in place on the other side. And then, silence. No more movement, no knocks, only the sound of everyone breathing. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Peggy stood frozen, her hands trembling against the cold wooden handles. The air in the room felt suddenly heavier, colder, as if all warmth had been sucked out. Janet broke the silence first. "Mom," she whispered, her voice shaking. "It's not us. I swear it's in the room." Peggy stared at her daughter's pale face, then glanced around the room, the half-open window, the swaying curtains, the shadows stretching across the wall. Her mind wanted to find a rational reason. Wind, vibrations, imagination, anything but what she was beginning to suspect. She tried again to move the dresser. This time, it slid easily, like whatever was pushing it had let go. "See? Just old furniture?" Peggy muttered, forcing a smile she didn't feel. But her hands were still shaking. "Back to bed, girls. You're letting your imagination run wild." She ushered them back under their covers and kissed their foreheads. "Go on now, sleep. It's nothing." As she turned off the light and closed the door, she heard a faint whisper behind her. Too soft to make out, but unmistakably a voice. She froze. Her heart pounded. Then Janet screamed again. Peggy rushed back in. The girls were sitting upright, pointing toward the corner. "Mom, the chair moved." Peggy's eyes darted to the small wooden chair by the wall. It was rocking slightly, as if someone had just gotten up from it. She didn't wait to find out more. "That's enough! Everyone downstairs!" she barked, grabbing their hands and pulling them toward the stairs. Billy and Johnny, startled awake by the commotion, joined them halfway down. They all gathered in the living room, huddled together under the faint light of the ceiling lamp. "Mom, what's happening?" Billy whimpered. Peggy didn't answer. She was staring toward the stairwell, where faint footsteps, heavy, deliberate, were descending. One step, then another. She clutched her children close, every instinct in her body screaming to run. But where could they go? This was their home. The footsteps stopped. Then came 3 knocks again, this time from right behind the living room wall. Knock, knock, knock. The clock ticked loudly in the silence that followed. Outside, a dog barked at something unseen. Inside, Peggy Hodgson stood trembling in the dim light of her home, surrounded by her terrified children. She didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning, a haunting that would soon capture the attention of an entire nation. The Hodgson family was no longer alone. Something had awakened within those walls, and it wasn't going to leave quietly. The night after the dresser moved, Peggy Hodgson didn't sleep a wink. Every sound in the house felt louder than usual. The ticking clock, the dripping tap, even the faint creak of the stairs seemed alive. Her mind replayed the sight of the furniture sliding by itself again and again. By morning, the kids were groggy and jumpy. Janet kept glancing at the ceiling, as if she could hear something moving up there. Even the youngest, Billy, refused to go upstairs alone. Peggy tried to brush it off, forcing a smile as she buttered toast. "It's just the old house settling, love," she said softly. "Houses make noises sometimes." But deep down, she didn't believe it herself. That evening, as darkness crept in, a storm gathered outside. Wind howled through the cracks of the old house, and the power flickered once, twice, then steadied. The children sat close together in the living room, watching TV, their mother knitting quietly beside them, trying to pretend everything was normal. Then, from upstairs, came a crash. Peggy jumped. "What now?" she muttered, setting her knitting aside. She climbed the stairs, each step groaning beneath her feet. The air grew colder the higher she went. When she reached Janet and Margaret's room, she stopped. Their toys were scattered across the floor. The chair that once stood by the window was upside down, and written crudely on the wall, as if drawn with a child's crayon, were 2 words: "Help me." Peggy gasped. Who did this? But her daughters, standing behind her, shook their heads violently. "Mom, we didn't. We were downstairs the whole time." Before she could speak, the chair lifted, slowly, until it hovered a few inches off the ground. Peggy's breath caught in her throat. Oh, dear Lord. Then the chair dropped with a bang that shook the floorboards. They screamed, all of them. That night, Peggy decided the children would sleep together in her room. The girls clung to each other while the wind rattled the windows. "Try to sleep," Peggy whispered. "It'll be better in the morning." But around 2 a.m., Janet sat up suddenly. She heard breathing, heavy, raspy breathing, coming from the dark corner of the room. "Mom?" she whispered. Peggy stirred. "What is it, love?" "Someone's there." Peggy turned on the lamp. The corner was empty, or seemed to be. The wallpaper fluttered slightly, though there was no breeze. "Nothing's there, darling. Go back to sleep." Then, a voice spoke, low, gravelly, like an old man who'd smoked too many cigarettes. "This is my house." Peggy froze. The voice didn't come from outside. It came from inside the room. The children sat up, trembling. "Mom, who said that?" Margaret whimpered. Peggy swallowed hard. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice quivering. "Show yourself." Silence. Then the voice again, louder this time, angry. "Get out!" The lamp flickered violently, and the bulb burst, plunging the room into darkness. Screams echoed through the small house. Peggy grabbed her children and bolted down the stairs, her heart pounding. She reached for the telephone, but the line was dead, only static. In desperation, she ran to the neighbors, the Nottinghams who lived next door, banging frantically on their door. When Mr. Nottingham opened it, Peggy could barely speak. "Please, please come. There's someone in the house." He followed her back, flashlight in hand. They searched every room, closets, corners, under the beds, but found no intruder. The windows were locked, the doors still bolted from the inside. "Maybe it's just the wind, Peg," he said gently, though his eyes betrayed uncertainty. But as he spoke, they both heard it, faintly, from upstairs. A man's voice, muttering, laughing. Mr. Nottingham's flashlight trembled in his hand. Peggy whispered, "You hear it too, don't you?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I hear it." When dawn came, the house was quiet again. Too quiet. Peggy sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of tea. She hadn't slept. The children were huddled together in the living room, refusing to go upstairs. The chalk words, "Help me," were still on the wall. The air still felt heavy, wrong. Peggy finally whispered to herself, "If this isn't in our heads, then something's here, and it wants us gone." Outside, the sky began to brighten with morning light, but inside the Hodgson home, something unseen was watching, waiting, and the whispers were only growing louder. The morning light did little to bring comfort to the Hodgson family. The house on Green Street, once filled with laughter and children's chatter, now felt hollow, as if every corner was holding its breath. For 2 nights, Peggy and her children had heard voices, seen furniture move, and felt a presence that none of them could explain. But now, after another sleepless night, the fear was no longer whispered. It was real. Peggy tried to hold herself together. She had to, for the kids. But deep down, she knew something was terribly wrong with their home. By afternoon, Peggy went next door again to the Nottinghams, her face pale, her voice trembling. "Vic, Peggy Nottingham, I swear to you, there's something in that house. It talks." Mr. Nottingham frowned, glancing at his wife. "You sure it's not the kids pulling a prank?" Peggy shook her head. "You think I'd make this up? You come over tonight, Vic. See for yourself." That night, around 9 p.m., the Nottinghams joined the Hodgsons in their living room. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The only sound was the rain tapping against the window. They waited. 10 minutes. 20. Then 3 knocks from upstairs. Knock, knock, knock. Everyone froze. "Did you hear that?" Mrs. Nottingham whispered. Before anyone could answer, the lights flickered and a toy block flew across the room, hitting the wall with a sharp thud. "Bloody hell!" Mr. Nottingham shouted, jumping back. The children screamed. Peggy clutched Janet to her chest as more Lego pieces lifted off the floor, one by one, then dropped again, as if an invisible child was throwing a tantrum. "I told you!" Peggy cried. "Do you believe me now?" The room fell silent again. Mr. Nottingham's hands trembled as he turned to her. "Peggy, I think you need help. Real help." The next day, the local police were called. 2 officers, WPC Carolyn Heaps and PC Graham Morris, arrived to inspect the house. They expected a simple domestic complaint, but what they saw would later be written into their official report. They entered the living room with Peggy and the children standing close by. The air felt cold, unnaturally so. "That's where it happens," Peggy said quietly, pointing toward the corner near the old fireplace. As they stood there, a chair moved. No one touched it. It slid across the floor, scraping loudly before stopping halfway across the room. Officer Morris blinked, jaw dropping. Did you see that?" His partner nodded, eyes wide. "Yes, clear as day." Morris bent down, checking the floor, looking for wires. Anything. There were none. He wrote in his report later, "A large armchair moved 4 feet across the floor unassisted. I checked for any hidden causes and found none." Peggy covered her mouth, tears welling up. "It's not just me anymore," she whispered. "You all saw it." The officers, shaken, advised her to contact the local church. "If this is something spiritual," said WPC Heaps softly, "you need more than police help, Mrs. Hodgson." That night, the voices returned. Janet was the first to wake. She sat up, breathing hard. Her room was pitch black, but she could hear it again, that same deep, rasping voice. You shouldn't be here. Who are you? She whispered into the dark. No reply, just breathing. Close now, right beside her ear. Then, in a low growl, I'll kill you if you stay. Janet screamed. Margaret woke and turned on the lamp, but the bulb only flickered. The walls trembled with knocks and bangs, loud and rhythmic, echoing through the whole house. "Mom!" they cried. Peggy rushed in, her nightgown fluttering, her heart hammering. "Janet, what is it?" Janet pointed to the corner. "He's there." "The man! He said he wants us gone!" But there was no man, only a shadow that moved on its own. It stretched and shifted against the wall like smoke, pulsing as if alive. Then, a sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut, trapping them all inside. Peggy banged on the door, shouting, "Let us out!" Janet screamed, clutching her head as if she could still hear the voice whispering inside her mind. "You don't belong here. You don't belong here." The door flew open by itself, and everything stopped. Silence. Stillness. Only the sound of Peggy sobbing broke the quiet. By dawn, Peggy made her decision. She called the local paper, the Daily Mirror, begging them to send someone. "If no one believes us," she said, "then maybe they'll believe what they see." Little did she know, that call would bring more than just reporters. It would bring investigators, photographers, and soon, the attention of the Society for Psychical Research. And somewhere deep within the old Enfield house, the unseen presence stirred again. It had been noticed, and it was far from finished. The morning of September 4th, 1977 began with heavy clouds over Enfield, as if the sky itself knew what was waiting inside 284 Green Street. Peggy Hodgson stood by the window, her hands trembling as she watched a white van pull up to the curb. Two men stepped out, one carrying a camera, the other a notepad. Both wore the skeptical expressions of people expecting a hoax. They were reporters from the Daily Mirror, Douglas Bentz and Graham Morris, a photographer. Peggy greeted them at the door, pale but determined. "You said you wanted proof? You'll get it." Behind her, the children huddled close together, their eyes wary. Janet refused to go upstairs, clutching her mother's sleeve as if letting go meant being left behind. The reporters entered the house, taking in the worn carpets, the peeling wallpaper, the ordinary furniture. It didn't look like the kind of place where something supernatural would happen. Morris, the photographer, looked around with a half-smile. "Well, Mrs. Hodgson," he said, setting up his camera, "let's hope your ghosts are camera-shy." Peggy didn't laugh. "You'll see soon enough." They waited. Hours passed. The air inside the house grew stale and still. Nothing happened. No knocks, no voices, no movement. Just the faint ticking of the old clock on the mantel. Janet sat on the sofa, her eyes drooping. Margaret and Billy were whispering near the window. It almost felt normal again. Then, around 10:45 p.m., the first bang came. A sudden, sharp crack from upstairs, so loud it made everyone jump. Peggy looked at the reporter. "There, you hear it?" Before he could answer, another bang echoed, and then another. The ceiling above them seemed to shake. The men bolted upstairs with Peggy right behind them. When they reached Janet and Margaret's room, they froze. The chairs were overturning by themselves, slamming against the walls. The curtains flapped wildly, though the windows were closed tight. Janet screamed, pointing to the corner of the room. And in that instant, a small metal Lego brick shot across the air, hitting photographer Graham Morris right above the eye. "Ow! Bloody hell!" he shouted, stumbling back, clutching his forehead. He turned to the wall mirror. A tiny red welt was forming. The Lego had hit him hard enough to draw blood. Everyone was staring at him, shocked. Peggy's voice trembled. "Now do you believe me?" The photographer was pale, his skepticism gone. I don't know what that was, but something's here." As chaos swirled around them, Morris began taking photos, one after another, his camera clicking rapidly. The flashes lit the room in brief bursts, capturing faces twisted in fear, furniture mid-motion, curtains flying as if caught in a storm that no one else could feel. After a minute, everything stopped again. The air felt charged, heavy, like the calm after lightning strikes. Janet sat motionless on the bed, staring at the wall. Her lips were moving, whispering something under her breath. Peggy leaned closer. "Janet, what are you saying, love?" Janet's voice was faint, almost mechanical. "He's here," she said. Peggy's chest tightened. "Who's here?" "The man who died here. He won't go away." Morris lowered his camera slowly. "Did you say someone died here?" Peggy nodded. "Years ago, the previous tenant, an old man named Bill Wilkins, died in that very chair." The room fell silent. Only the soft creak of the wooden floor broke the stillness. Back downstairs, the reporters exchanged uneasy glances. Bence whispered, "We've got to tell someone about this. The paper won't believe it without proof." Morris nodded. "They'll believe the photos. I caught something. Maybe movement. Maybe more." He didn't say the rest aloud, but Peggy could see it in his face. He believed her now. Before leaving, Morris looked back at the darkened hallway. The house felt different, as if it were watching them go. He shuddered. "Mrs. Hodgson, I think whatever's here doesn't like attention." Peggy nodded slowly. "Good," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Then maybe it'll leave." But deep inside, she knew the truth. This was only the beginning. That night, the knocks returned louder than ever. The walls groaned, furniture rattled, and once again, Janet's voice changed. Deeper, older, colder. "Get out of my house." The next morning, the Daily Mirror reached out to a group known for handling the unexplainable, the Society for Psychical Research. And that's how Maurice Gross, a quiet, kind-hearted investigator with a grieving soul, would soon walk into the Hodgson home and into the most terrifying case of his life. By the time the Society for Psychical Research got word of the Enfield haunting, the Hodgsons were already exhausted, physically, mentally, and spiritually. Knocks, moving furniture, and Janet's strange voice had turned their once cozy house into a waking nightmare. When Maurice Gross arrived at 284 Green Street on a gray September afternoon, he didn't look like the kind of man who hunted ghosts. He was soft-spoken, neatly dressed, and carried more empathy than arrogance. A man who had once been an inventor before tragedy changed him. His daughter had died in a motorcycle accident not long before, and grief had made him curious about what lay beyond life and death. For him, the Hodgson case wasn't just an investigation. It was personal. Peggy greeted him at the door, relief in her tired eyes. "Thank God you've come," she said. "No one else believes us." Grossa smiled kindly. "Let's start with what you've experienced, Mrs. Hodgson. Everything, no matter how strange." As she spoke, he took notes, pages and pages of knocks, voices, moving objects, and Janet's strange episodes. He listened carefully, asking gentle questions. When she finished, he said, "All right, I'll stay here a few nights. We'll find out what's going on." That night, as the family went to bed, Grossa set up tape recorders in several rooms. He placed a small camera on the landing and sat quietly in the living room, notebook in hand. At first, the house was calm. Then, knock, knock, knock. Gross looked up. "Is that you, Janet?" he called upstairs. "No," came Janet's trembling voice. "It's in the wall again." He approached the sound, placing his ear against the cold plaster. It was rhythmic, intelligent, like a coded message. 3 knocks, then silence. 3 more from a different wall. He tapped back experimentally, and the wall responded. His heart raced. "It's communicating," he whispered. He started a recording. "Mister, whoever you are," he said aloud, trying to steady his voice. "Can you give me 1 knock for yes, 2 for no?" He waited. "Are you here with us?" Knock. Peggy gasped. "Dear God." Gross's face went pale. "Do you mean harm to this family?" 2 knocks. "No." He scribbled furiously in his notebook, his scientific curiosity battling with rising fear. "Can you tell us your name?" he asked. No sound this time, just the creaking of the floorboards and the ticking of the clock. Then, from upstairs, came a raspy male voice. "My name's Bill." Everyone froze. The voice had come from Janet's room. They rushed upstairs, Gross leading the way. Janet was sitting on her bed, eyes half open, lips barely moving. "Bill," she croaked in a guttural tone far too deep for an 11-year-old. "Bill Wilkins." Peggy's knees buckled. "That's the man who died here," she whispered. Grosse stepped forward, recorder in hand. "Bill, how did you die?" Janet's head tilted unnaturally to one side, and the voice spoke again. "Sat in that chair, couldn't breathe, died in the corner." Peggy covered her mouth in horror. That was exactly how the landlord had said the old tenant passed away. Alone, in his chair, gasping for air. Janet's body went rigid. Then suddenly the voice turned into a violent growl. "Get out of my house!" The lights flickered and a picture frame flew off the wall, shattering near Grosse's feet. "Janet!" Peggy screamed, running to her daughter. But when she tried to touch her, Janet's eyes rolled back. Her voice wasn't her own anymore. "Leave me alone!" she cried, or perhaps it wasn't her crying at all. After several minutes, it stopped. Janet slumped forward, exhausted, her breathing shallow. Grosse checked her pulse. Normal, but her skin was ice cold. He turned off the recorder and looked at Peggy, who was trembling. "I believe you," he said quietly. "And I'm not leaving until I understand what this is." Peggy's voice was small. "You mean you think it's real?" He nodded slowly. "Whatever's here, Mrs. Hodgson, it's intelligent. It remembers. And it's angry." Over the next few nights, Grosse documented more phenomena. Objects thrown, voices recorded, cold drafts that appeared without warning. Sometimes Janet's voice changed mid-sentence. Sometimes furniture moved in plain view. But the worst was the laughter. Low, mocking laughter that echoed through the halls when no one was there. And yet, through the fear, a strange connection formed between Grosse and the Hodgson family. To the children, he became a kind of protector. To Peggy, a lifeline. But deep down, he could feel it. The house was feeding off something. Fear, grief, maybe both. One night, as he packed his notes, he whispered to himself, "This isn't just a haunting. It's a story that wants to be told." And somewhere, in the darkened hallway, a voice answered faintly on his recorder. "Then listen." By late September 1977, 284 Green Street had turned into a war zone, not of soldiers and guns, but of invisible forces and sleepless fear. Every night brought new terror. The knocks had turned to pounding. Furniture didn't just move anymore. It flew. Objects were hurled across rooms as if tossed by angry hands. Even the family's beloved pet, their small parakeet, had started behaving strangely, chirping frantically at corners where no one stood. Maurice Grosse had now been staying with the Hodgsons for several nights, and the deeper he investigated, the more he realized this was unlike any haunting he'd ever heard of. That Friday evening, Grosse arrived with Guy Lyon Playfair, another researcher from the Society for Psychical Research. Playfair was a writer and investigator, known for being both curious and skeptical. When Grosse told him the story about voices, flying furniture, and a child channeling a dead man, he was intrigued but doubtful. "Children can be clever," Playfair had said as they entered the house. "Maybe they're playing tricks." Peggy only gave a tired look. "You'll see soon enough, Mr. Playfair." They gathered in the living room, tape recorders running. Janet and Margaret sat on the couch, pale but composed. The younger boys were upstairs trying to sleep. Grosse leaned forward. "All right, Bill," he said aloud. "If you're here, give us a sign." For a moment, silence. Then, bang. The ceiling above them cracked loudly. Everyone jumped. Peggy gasped. "That's his room. Janet's room." They rushed upstairs. Janet was sitting cross-legged on her bed, staring at the wall, her face blank. The curtains fluttered, though the window was closed tight. "Janet?" Grosse asked carefully. "Are you all right, love?" Her head turned slowly toward him. Her eyes looked darker somehow, empty. In a voice that wasn't her own, she said, "You keep asking questions, but you don't listen." Playfair blinked. "Did you hear that? That's not her normal tone." The voice continued, deeper, raspier, as though coming from deep within her chest. "I died in this chair. You can't help me. Nobody can." Janet's body shook violently, and then she screamed. The bed lifted off the floor and dropped again with a thunderous crash. Peggy ran forward, but Grosse pulled her back. "Don't touch her," he warned. She could get hurt, or you might. The door slammed shut. Then came laughter. Low, echoing laughter that chilled every soul in the room. You can't make me leave. It's my house now. The tape recorders captured every word. When it finally stopped, Janet fell limp onto her pillow, breathing hard. Gross quickly checked her pulse. She was alive, but exhausted. Playfair sat down, shaken. Maurice, if that's faked, she deserves an Oscar. Grossi sighed, his voice heavy. It's not fake. I've been here for weeks. Whatever this is, it's real. Over the next few days, the disturbances grew bolder. Objects would crash down even when no one was home. Wet footprints appeared on the hallway floor. Footprints too large for any of the children. And sometimes in the middle of the night, Janet would be found in impossible places. Once on top of a tall dresser, another time wedged behind a locked door. No one could explain how she got there. Reporters began camping outside. Neighbors whispered. Some mocked the Hodgsons, saying they were doing it for attention. But others avoided the house altogether. Inside, fear was eating the family alive. Peggy barely slept. Margaret started praying every night, clutching her rosary tight. The boys refused to sleep upstairs, and Janet, poor Janet, was losing herself more and more each day. Sometimes she'd speak in her normal voice, sometimes as Bill, sometimes in whispers that didn't even sound human. One night, Gross and Playfair decided to try something new, a direct conversation with the entity. They gathered in the living room, dim light flickering from a single lamp. The tape was rolling. Bill, Grossi said calmly, if you can hear me, I want you to speak through Janet again. Let's talk. The air grew cold. Janet's head tilted slightly, then her mouth opened. I'm here. Good, Grossi said. Why are you haunting this family? Because they're in my house. Can you move on, Bill? Leave this place? The voice laughed. I can't. Why not? I'm stuck. How did you die? Long pause, then softly. I went blind. Then I died in my chair, and now I'm still here. Grossa felt a lump in his throat. He knew the story matched what Peggy had told him. The real Bill Wilkins had died in that exact way. Playfair whispered, ask him why he stays. Gross nodded. Bill, why don't you go toward the light? Toward peace? Because this is my house, the voice growled. And they're the ones who should leave. A moment later, the lights burst, plunging the room into darkness. Peggy screamed. The children cried, and in the darkness, something heavy dragged across the floor. Slow, deliberate, like someone pulling furniture. Then, silence. When they turned the lights back on, the armchair where Bill had died had moved. All by itself, turned to face them. As if he was sitting there, watching. That night, Maurice Gross wrote in his journal, it no longer feels like I'm studying the haunting. It feels like the haunting is studying us. And upstairs, Janet whispered in her sleep, he's getting stronger. By October 1977, the Hodgson home no longer felt like a home at all. The laughter, the warmth, the noise of everyday life, all replaced by tension so thick that even the walls seemed to hum with dread. Peggy Hodgson had aged years in just months. Her eyes carried dark circles and her hands trembled whenever night fell. She still tried to keep things normal, cooking, cleaning, tucking the children in, but every sound made her jump. Every shadow made her heart race. And Janet, the once bright, cheeky girl, was changing fast. Maurice Gross and Guy Playfair visited almost every night now, documenting everything. One evening, they arrived to find Peggy pacing outside her house, tears in her eyes. She's different tonight, she said, voice trembling. It's worse, much worse. When they entered, the air inside felt thick, almost alive. Janet sat in the corner of the living room, her knees drawn to her chest, her face pale and blank. Margaret sat nearby, crying quietly. Janet, love? Grossa said softly. It's me, Maurice. No answer. Playfair leaned closer. Can you hear us, Janet? Her head snapped up suddenly. Too fast, too sharp. The men stepped back. Janet's lips curled into a grin that didn't belong to her. Then, in that deep, guttural tone, the voice of Bill returned. You keep asking questions, but you never listen. Gross turned on the recorder. Bill, we're listening now. Tell us what you want." The voice laughed. "I already told you. They're in my house. I'll make them leave." Peggy's voice shook. "Please, Bill, she's just a little girl. Leave her alone." "She's mine now," the voice hissed. Janet's body twitched violently, her arms jerking, her back arching until her head nearly touched the floor. "Hold her down!" Gross shouted. But before anyone could reach her, the chair Janet sat on lifted 2 feet off the ground. She floated for a terrifying few seconds before crashing back down. Peggy screamed, "Stop it! You're hurting her!" Janet's eyes opened again, now rolling upward, showing only the whites. And then came a sound no one in that room ever forgot. A deep, animalistic growl, echoing from her chest, vibrating the air. For days afterward, Janet's fits grew worse. She spoke in multiple voices, sometimes laughing, sometimes cursing, sometimes crying as though she could feel another mind fighting inside her own. The neighbors refused to enter the house. Reporters outside still called the Hodgsons attention seekers, but the family didn't care anymore. They were just trying to survive. Peggy's brother, Johnny Burkham, came to help one evening. When he saw Janet being thrown from her bed by unseen hands, his skepticism died instantly. "Peg, you've got to get a priest," he whispered. And so, desperate and terrified, Peggy contacted the local parish. The next night, Father William O'Neill arrived, a kind-faced man in his 50s, carrying holy water and a rosary. He had seen strange things before, but nothing prepared him for the Hodgsons' home. He entered Janet's room, whispered a prayer, and sprinkled holy water. Almost immediately, the temperature dropped. His breath became visible in the air. Then, Janet sat up, her expression blank. The priest said gently, "Janet, do you know who I am?" The deep voice answered instead, "You can't stop me, Father." O'Neill's grip tightened around his cross. "In the name of the Lord, leave this child." The voice laughed, mocking. "You think he can help? He left me long ago." Suddenly, every object in the room shot toward the walls. Toys, lamps, books, all at once, as if pulled by a magnetic storm. The lights flickered and the priest's cross was torn from his hand, hitting the floor. Then silence. Janet collapsed, gasping. Tears ran down her cheeks. "Make him stop, Mum," she cried weakly. "He won't go away." Peggy held her daughter close, sobbing. Father O'Neill gathered his things, shaken. "This house needs more than prayer," he murmured. That night, Gross made a new entry in his journal. "Something is taking control of the girl. If this continues, we might lose Janet. Not just to fear, but to something else entirely." And downstairs, as Peggy tried to lull her children to sleep, the television flickered on by itself. A faint voice whispered from the static, "You can't save her." By November 1977, the story of the Hodgson haunting had spread far beyond the quiet streets of Enfield. Newspapers printed photos of levitating children, reporters fought for interviews, and skeptics mocked the family on national television. But for Peggy and her children, it was no longer about proving anything. It was about survival. The house at 284 Green Street had become a living nightmare. No one slept properly anymore. Every night something new happened. A crash, a whisper, or the deep voice of Bill taunting them through the darkness. Janet was growing weaker, pale as paper, her energy drained by forces unseen. And then, one cold morning, there was a knock at the door. Peggy opened it to find 2 strangers, a tall, calm man with kind eyes, and a woman with a serene, almost motherly aura. They introduced themselves as Ed and Lorraine Warren, American paranormal investigators who had heard of the case. "Mrs. Hodgson," Ed said gently, "we've come to help. Maurice Gross contacted us." Peggy's eyes filled with hope. "If you can stop this, please. My children are breaking apart." Lorraine stepped inside slowly, her gaze sweeping across the room. She paused, eyes unfocused, as though listening to something no one else could hear. After a few seconds, she whispered, "He's here, watching." That evening, the Warrens joined Gross and Playfair for their first observation. The house was quiet, eerily so. They gathered in the living room, cameras rolling, recorders humming softly. Ed broke the silence. "Mr. Gross, What we're dealing with might not be just a haunting. This could be oppression, the early stage of something darker. Playfair frowned. You mean demonic? Lorraine nodded slowly. I can feel it. There's deep anger in these walls, and sorrow. Suddenly, a bang echoed from upstairs, sharp and violent. Peggy gasped. That's Janet's room! They all rushed up the narrow staircase. Inside, Janet was floating above her bed, her back arched, her eyes wide open but completely white. The crucifix on the wall was upside down, slowly twisting as if turned by invisible hands. Put her down! Peggy screamed, but Janet only convulsed in midair, her body stiff as a board. Ed Warren pulled a small vial of holy water from his coat. Lorraine, pray with me. He sprinkled the water in a cross pattern. At the same time, Lorraine held her rosary and whispered, In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Janet screamed, a sound so raw and piercing it didn't sound human. Then she dropped onto the bed with a heavy thud. The lights flickered. A cold wind swept through the room, though every window was shut tight. When Janet woke, she sobbed uncontrollably. He won't leave me. He says he's not done. Lorraine sat beside her, brushing her hair gently. He feeds on fear, sweetheart. Every time you're afraid, you make him stronger. Janet whispered, Then how do I stop him? Lorraine smiled faintly. By being braver than he is cruel. Later that night, the Warrens held a seance in the living room. They formed a circle. Ed, Lorraine, Peggy, Gross, and Playfair. The candles flickered low as Lorraine entered a deep trance. She began to whisper softly, He's here. His name is William. William Bill Wilkins. Ed leaned forward. Bill, if you can hear us, speak. Lorraine's expression changed, her lips curling, her voice suddenly deepening. I'm here. You shouldn't have come. Peggy's hand trembled. What do you want from us, Bill? You're in my home. I died here. I can't leave. Gross took notes rapidly. Why can't you go to the light? The voice through Lorraine answered with fury. Because it's not my light, it's his. Ed froze. Whose light, Bill? Lorraine's body shook violently. Her voice cracked, lower than ever. The one who hides behind me. A sudden gust of cold air blew through the room, snuffing out all the candles at once. Then, from the darkness, a voice that wasn't Bill's spoke, darker, slower, layered with distortion. You think this is about a man, but he's only my door. Peggy screamed. Who are you? The entity's voice echoed, making the walls tremble. You call me what your priests fear most. You call me the demon. The seance ended in chaos. Lorraine gasped awake, tears streaming down her face. It's not Bill. It's something using him. Something ancient. Ed put an arm around her. We've seen this before, Laurie. The demon hides behind the dead to trick us. Gross paled. Then Janet. Lorraine looked toward the stairs, her voice breaking. She's not just haunted. She's possessed. That night, as everyone tried to rest, Janet stood silently by her window, staring at her reflection in the glass. Her lips moved, but the voice that came out was not hers. They can't save you, Janet. You're mine now. Her eyes rolled back, and with a faint smile, she whispered, Valak. The next morning, the light that poured into 284 Green Street felt hollow, thin, like it couldn't quite reach the corners of the house anymore. Peggy Hodgson sat at the kitchen table, clutching her teacup with trembling hands. The warmth of the drink was the only comfort she had left. Upstairs, Janet was sleeping, or at least trying to. Her small body looked fragile against the sheets, her face pale and tired. The Warrens hadn't slept either. Lorraine sat by the window, rosary beads slipping through her fingers, whispering prayers under her breath. And when she turned to Ed, she whispered something that made his blood run cold. I heard his name last night, the real one, not Bill's. Ed frowned. Whose name? Lorraine looked down. Valak. Meanwhile, Maurice Gross and Guy Playfair were analyzing the recordings from the seance. The room was silent except for the hiss of the tape as it played, Bill's gravelly voice echoing from the speakers. Then came the other one, deeper, guttural, layered like a chorus of whispers. You call me what your priests fear most. You call me the demon. Playfair hit pause. That's not the same voice. Listen to the resonance. It's overlapping frequencies. No child can mimic that. Gross nodded grimly. And did you notice? When it said the demon, the temperature dropped 2 degrees in this room. He rewound again, listening carefully. Then something new caught his ear. Just beneath the main voice, buried in the static. A faint whisper, almost a hiss. Valak. The men exchanged horrified looks. That evening, as dusk fell, Lorraine went upstairs to check on Janet. The girl was sitting on her bed, clutching a stuffed toy, staring at the wall. "Janet, sweetheart," Lorraine said softly, sitting beside her. "How are you feeling?" Janet didn't look at her. "He says you shouldn't be here." "Who, love?" "The crooked man." Lorraine's breath caught. "What crooked man?" Janet turned slowly, her expression blank. "The one who walks on twisted legs. The one who smiles too wide." Lorraine felt a chill run down her spine. She glanced toward the corner, and her heart stopped. The shadow of a tall, bent figure appeared on the wall. Moving, though, there was no light to cast it. It stretched upward, distorted, its limbs long and wrong. Then Janet's head jerked sharply toward the shadow. Her mouth opened, and from deep within her throat came the voice again. "You can't take her from me, woman of light." Lorraine stood, clutching her cross. "In the name of God, reveal yourself." The air turned icy. The lamps flickered, the curtains billowed violently, and the room filled with a low, guttural laugh. Lorraine stumbled back as Janet suddenly levitated, her eyes pure white. "She's mine. She always was." Downstairs, Ed heard the scream and rushed up the stairs. "Lorraine!" He burst into the room, just in time to see Janet suspended midair, her body twisting unnaturally. "Get her down!" Peggy cried from the doorway. Ed grabbed the nearest Bible and began to pray aloud. Lorraine joined him, both their voices trembling but firm. "In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." The demon shrieked through Janet's mouth, a terrible distorted scream that made the windows rattle. "You can't cast me out. I am Valak, the defiler, the profane." The room exploded in chaos, books flying, glass shattering, the crucifix tearing itself from the wall. Lorraine shouted, "Valak, you have no power here!" For a brief moment, Janet dropped to the floor, gasping. But before anyone could reach her, she crawled backward on all fours, spider-like, toward the corner. Peggy screamed, "That's not my daughter." Then silence. Janet stopped moving. Her head tilted slightly. Then she whispered in her normal small voice, "He's inside me now." Lorraine knelt beside her, placing a hand over the girl's heart. "Fight him, Janet. You're stronger than he is." Tears streamed down Janet's face. "He won't go. He says he's not done until we all die." Lorraine turned to Ed, her voice low. "We need to finish this. If we don't, Valak will take her completely." Ed nodded grimly. "Then we end it tonight." Later, as the night settled over Enfield once more, the investigators prepared for one final confrontation. They would not only face Bill Wilkins, but the demon that used his soul as a disguise. Lorraine looked at the frightened family huddled together. Peggy, Margaret, Johnny, and little Billy. "Stay strong," she said softly. "The demon feeds on despair. Don't give him what he wants." Peggy nodded, clutching her children tightly. "Just bring my daughter back." As they climbed the stairs, Ed carrying the crucifix and holy water, Lorraine whispered one last prayer under her breath. But even she could feel it. The house was alive again, breathing, waiting. And from Janet's room, that same terrible voice whispered, just loud enough for them all to hear, "Welcome back." The night had turned colder than ever before. Wind rattled through the cracks of 284 Green Street, and thunder rumbled low in the distance, as if even the skies trembled for what was about to unfold. Inside, the house was cloaked in darkness, save for the faint glow of candles placed by Ed and Lorraine Warren. Their flickering light danced against the peeling wallpaper, casting tall, trembling shadows that seemed to move on their own. Peggy stood near the bottom of the stairs with her children, holding them close, whispering prayers through trembling lips. "Please, bring her back," she murmured. Upstairs, the air was colder than the grave. The Warrens entered Janet's room, and there she was, standing in the corner, facing the wall, whispering to it as though someone were standing right beside her. Lorraine's heart ached. "Janet," she said softly. "It's Lorraine. You don't have to be afraid anymore." No response, just a faint whisper. Then Janet's body twitched, and a deep, rasping laugh filled the room. "You came back." Ed stepped forward, crucifix in hand. "We're here to free this house, and this child." "You don't belong here, Valak," the voice growled. "She's mine. She called me, and I answered." Lorraine's eyes widened. "She didn't call you. You tricked her, using Bill's spirit." Janet's body stiffened, and in that terrible dual voice, half her, half something else, the demon hissed, "Bill was weak. I needed a doorway, and she opened it for me." The walls began to shake. Drawers slid open, the lamp burst into sparks, and the bed lifted an inch off the floor. Outside, the thunder cracked so loudly that it sounded like the world itself was splitting. Lorraine shouted over the chaos, "In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, I command you to leave this child." Valak's laughter echoed like a storm. "You have no power here, woman of light." But Lorraine didn't back down. She held her rosary high, her voice steady despite the cold that clawed at her chest. "I do not stand alone," she cried. "God is with me." Ed joined in, reading from his Bible. "Behold, I give unto you power to tread on serpents and scorpions, and over all the power of the enemy." Janet screamed, her voice twisting between hers and the demon's. "Stop! You'll kill her!" Lorraine turned her gaze toward the cross that had fallen from the wall earlier. It lay upside down, until slowly it began to turn upright on its own. A sign. She focused her will, her faith, and shouted, "Valak, by your name, you are bound. By God's love, you are banished." The room exploded with force. A gust of wind hurled furniture across the floor. Shards of glass flew like knives. Ed shielded his wife, shouting, "Lorraine!" But she stood firm, her eyes closed, her lips moving faster, praying with every ounce of strength she had. Janet was lifted into the air, her hands clawing at nothing, her voice screeching, "He's pulling me!" "Janet, fight him!" Peggy screamed from the hall. Tears streamed down Janet's face as she gasped, "He's too strong!" Lorraine took one desperate step forward, clutching her cross. "He's only strong because you're scared. Don't feed him, Janet. You are stronger than he'll ever be." Janet's body trembled violently. Her mouth opened, and Valak's voice bellowed, "She is mine!" Lorraine shouted the name one last time. "Valak, I cast you back to the void!" Then, silence. The lights flickered once, twice, and went out completely. A sound like a great sigh filled the room, the air rushing out all at once. When Ed lit a candle, Janet lay still on the floor. Her chest rose and fell slowly. Lorraine knelt beside her, placing a trembling hand on the girl's cheek. "It's over," she whispered. "He's gone." Janet opened her eyes, clear, brown, alive. "Mom?" she croaked weakly. Peggy rushed forward, falling to her knees beside her daughter. "Oh, thank God. Thank God." Lorraine smiled faintly, tears spilling down her face. "You're safe now, sweetheart." The following morning, the sun rose brighter than it had in months. No cold spots, no voices, no moving furniture. The air felt warm again. Ed and Lorraine stood outside the Hodgsons' house, the morning light shining softly on their tired faces. "Think it's really over?" Ed asked. Lorraine nodded slowly. "For now. But evil never dies. It just waits for a new door." Ed sighed, glancing back at the small, quiet house. "Then let's hope that door stays closed." Inside, Peggy made breakfast for her children. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was laughter again, real, human laughter. Janet sat at the table, sipping her tea, her eyes thoughtful. She could still remember everything, the voices, the cold, the feeling of being trapped. But she also remembered Lorraine's words, "You're stronger than he is." And somehow, deep down, she believed it. As they sat together, rebuilding their lives, The camera Maurice Gross had left in the corner clicked on one last time, a timer he'd forgotten to disable. For a moment, the frame captured the family smiling, then flickered. In the background behind Janet S. chair, just for a split second, the faint shadow of a nun as veil drifted past the wall. Then the film went black. Thank you for joining us through this haunting journey. If you felt the chills tonight, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because in this world, the ghosts may fade, but their stories never die. This is Ghosttery, where every whisper has a story, and every story has a soul.